Hey guys, welcome back. This is episode number 5 of the Golden Handcuffs Guy podcast. I'm really excited. I just got done interviewing JP Moses. In this episode, we dive into clarity about purpose in your life. And we also find out how a near-death experience became one of the best things that ever happened in JP's life. Listen in. Welcome, JP.
Thanks, Reese. This is my
So
first time being on this side of the table, as I said before we hit record here.
exciting, the shoe's on the other foot.
Right.
So a lot of the time I talk about golden handcuffs is related to your job's really good. You got to get out of your job. This isn't necessarily the case with JP. He has a different history. Because one of the other things I talk about with golden handcuffs is overcoming something very difficult in our lives to get on to something great. That a lot of times that difficult thing gives us the clarity that we need to go and do what it is that we are truly called to do. And I can't think of a better example of this kind of situation than JP. So before we dive into that, JP, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you're doing now?
All right. Thanks, man. It's really an honor to be sharing this with you and with the internets, whoever else tuning into this. I just a snapshot of where I am right now. I live in the Memphis area, just outside of Memphis. Married for just over 20 years now. 44 years old, 2 kids, 17 and 12. I work from home all day long. This is happening right now from the room above my detached garage. So when people ask me what I do for a living, I have a hard time answering the question because I don't think of myself as a specific type of job. I don't wear my job as my identity. I think of me just doing what I'm wired to do well and making money from it as often as I can. And I do it all from this room. So I never leave my house. So people always say, you never leave your house? Oh, that's so sad. I'm like, no, I love it this way. So what I'm doing right now is I coach with Life and Air, as you know. I also am I believe my official title is the Director of Awesome with awesomerei.com. And I flip land. So that's 3 different, I don't know if you call them, I guess one of them is a legit business. The other is growing to become a business. And the third is not really a business, coaching. It's more just a fun thing that I enjoy building into other people. Well, I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but those are the 3 things that I do right now. Is that a good snapshot or you want to?
No, absolutely. That's perfect. So you obviously didn't just decide on those things overnight. What led you to get into those different business and fulfillment?
All right. I promise I'll try and give you the condensed version of this, but in order for me to answer that question, I have to go back to Y2K.
All right, saddle up. We got 19 years here.
I know, right? So in the year 2000, Conan fans, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and thought, man, I want to be like this Robert Kiyosaki guy. And he got started in real estate. So I guess I'll get started in real estate. So I dug into all the real estate forums of the day. And I got started in real estate investing. Long story short, I started first in rental properties, then realized that I'm not a good landlord and it's not a good fit for me. So through some trial and error and some mistakes and hard-earned lessons, I transitioned to, in 2002, wholesaling houses, which is quick flip houses, just buying and selling, not buying and fixing and selling. If that makes sense. It's a quick nickel instead of a slow dime. I know you know what it is, but for anyone who doesn't know, I just want to explain it. Fast forward to 2006, I was a successful real estate investor. I was full-time wholesaling houses, running my local real estate investor association, just flipping houses, checking boxes, taking names. But I was a crying on the inside kind of clown because I didn't know the difference. I didn't yet understand the difference between owning a business and being self-employed.
Hmm.
For anyone who needs to understand that, I refer you to Robert Kiyosaki's sequel to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Cash Flow Quadrant. He talks about the 4 quadrants. So once I realized, okay, I'm in deep, I need to be a business owner, not a self-employed guy who wears all the hats, jack of all trades, master of none. I didn't know what to do. A guy approached me at the time with a proposition. Basically, he said, "Hey, I need somebody with your skills who can help me with my fancy website." And I had never thought about doing what I do as a hobby on the internet full time. And this guy was in the real estate investing space. His name was Steve Cook at the time. He's the founder of Life and Air, actually, a good friend of mine. At the time, his everything orbited around flippinghomes.com, and I was part of that community. I invited him to come speak at our RIA group, and he saw some spark in me that it was interesting to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw an opportunity. I get to not depend on this self-employed nightmare, this success in real estate full time anymore. I can pull back and start working with this guy for a paycheck. I can still do real estate investing actively on a part-time basis, but not depend on it for a living. I can instead make my primary living doing what he's invited me to do with him at flippinghomes.com in this internet marketing world I'd been kind of toying around with. So I made that decision in 2006. Fast forward to 2008, we parted ways as friends in that venture, and I still wasn't ready to get started back into doing deals full time. So I started a blog, I started a podcast, I started doing all the internet-y things that you can do at the time that just seemed fun and interesting. Mm-hmm. And as I did that over the years, actively doing deals part-time, full-time internet marketer, I became connected with lots of the thought leaders and teachers in the space, in the real estate investing space. Fast forward again to 2012, and I was invited to start creating content and marketing for realestatemogul.com. And that was a big enterprise that was just launching. And I try and keep it short. I'm going to condense it down to, I said no, no, no. And then finally I said, okay, yes. And so I started doing that. Basically, that became the business that I accidentally built. I built a business creating content for other real estate investing teachers and trainers. But I learned the lesson about not building a self-employed nightmare. I wanted to build it as a business. So I said, in 6 months, I've got to hire my first person and start replacing myself in this and run it like a business owner, not a jack of all trades who wears all the hats.
Mm-hmm. So you had learned from, you had the outward successful appearance, but you knew deep inside that that really wasn't the way you were defining your own success. And so this time you took that lesson to heart and changed things around a little bit.
By everyone else's definition, I was a raving success. I was a high income earner. I was doing this internet. I was doing real estate deals and internet marketing. But I wasn't a success as I wanted to define it, because I don't know if there's anybody out there who can relate to this, but as a hardwired, I don't want to hesitate to say entrepreneur, because everybody's an entrepreneur today. It's kind of the joke to say some homeless guy on the street is an entrepreneur, right? But as a hardwired person who blazes trails, I guess, and based on what I feel like my strengths are, it is too easy for me to lean into doing that in a bright, shiny object kind of way, in a trial and error kind of way, at the neglect of the time and the focus that my family and the rest of my life needs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I was still struggling in 2012, 2013, 2014 with I don't want to say work-life balance, because I don't really think that's a thing, but the counterbalance. Sometimes if you're building a business, it requires more attention than you would want to give for the long haul, but you've got to counterbalance that with on the life side of things in order to maintain a healthy version of yourself. Anyway, that's a rabbit trail, man. I promise I'd keep this short. Fast forward to 2015, I started building an active real estate company again, wholesaling houses. And then it all came to a screeching halt in 2016, September 12th, 2016, to be exact, when I almost died in a really bad car crash. I'm just going to leave this pause uncomfortably long.
Pause for effect.
That's right. That's right. So I know that you'd like for me to tell about the car crash story, but I'm not sure if this is the right opportunity to segue into that, or is that enough of the amplified backstory to give people an idea of the crazy entity that is JP? And
Yes, because you were on this path of building business, building your life, and you had this vision of where you were trying to go. Now you have this car crash, and that literally changed your life. So, what? I guess let's start with the crash. Like, what happened?
Well, I don't remember. I don't remember the crash. I don't remember anything actually several months prior to that, because amnesia apparently is a thing. So I have some fuzzy memories of. In fact, I was about a month before the car crash. I was at a life and air retreat with other people in my group, and I barely remember that. And anyway, that's another story. That's a rabbit trail. The first memory I have is about 5 weeks after the car crash, when I slowly started waking up. Apparently, what had happened is I was driving home from a monthly real estate lunch that I controlled, that I had started here locally, just to network with other real estate investors. And for some reason, on my way home on the highway, I veered into the median and into oncoming traffic. Now, I know I wasn't suicidal, so I know it wasn't an attempt on my own life. As you try and go through the things that might have happened, you think of, was there some kind of, did you have a seizure? I don't know. I don't have a history of that kind of thing, but it's possible. I wasn't drinking, so there was nothing like that going on. Another possibility is that maybe I was temporarily distracted by my phone. Shame on me if that was the case. I didn't have a habit of like watching videos or, doing Facebook on my phone. But I had been known up until that point to try and get away with, when I felt safe to do so, sending text messages when I felt like I had the clearance to do so. So maybe that was at least a part of it. But if that were the case, as soon as if you've ever done anything like that, as soon as you start to veer off the road, you get the signal, okay, I need to correct course. Or especially if I went into the median, I would have fixed it. So I don't think that was the case. Whatever it was, it happened. It could have been a vehicle malfunction, but I went into the median, into an oncoming car, and it didn't kill me, but it almost did. They had to, when the highway patrol arrived, they had to helicopter me to the local hospital. I was bleeding out internally, not externally. I was swelling up because I was bleeding somewhere on the inside. Every rib on the left side on the back was broken except the top two, because a piece of metal had come down from the top of my car. And I was just breathing, they said, little guppy breaths, like just trying to stay alive. So they helicoptered me to the hospital and cut me open. I got a really cool scar all the way from my sternum to my belt line. Apparently it was my spleen that was bleeding out, got kind of squashed by those broken ribs. So they just took it out. Apparently you don't need a spleen.
One of those useless organs.
Yeah, I guess. It's not useless, but it's mostly you can do without it, as long as you get like a shot every 5 years or something. But I don't feel it or anything. But I would have bled out if they hadn't cut me open to figure it out. Lots of broken ribs. I had a collapsed lung. I almost died several times in many ways. I make light of it now because it is, I find it funny in different ways, but there was no humor. I almost died. And even while I was in the hospital, unconscious for those 5 weeks, I had acute respiratory distress syndrome, which has a 40% mortality rate, I think. Anyway, lots of trauma, lots of tragedy. Around week 5, I started to wake up. And it was fuzzy. It was kind of like I was emerging through a fog. It wasn't like, I'm awake, what happened?
Mm-hmm. Kind of like waking up and not really knowing where you're at and kind of going back to sleep, that kind of thing.
Well, I knew people were with me. My wife, Cara, my wife's name is Cara. She was the bright, shiny gem for me when I stayed in the hospital. She almost never left my side. And she would tell me each time I came to what happened. And I struggled to remember it each time. But as she would tell me, I would go, okay, I've been in a car crash. I don't remember it, but it must be true because I'm in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I got to make the best out of this and figure it out. Now, let me take a step back for a minute and say my context for a big car crash was in 2012. My dad in Columbia, South Carolina, was driving home late one night on his moped. And apparently Columbia, South Carolina has no helmet law, and he thought his hair didn't want to get messed up, so he didn't have a helmet on. And he hit a patch of sand and slid and conked his head. His skull cracked. His brain was swelling. He had brain damage. They had to cut into his skull and literally remove a piece of his brain. My dad is still alive. In fact, he just had another surgery. That was 2012. He just had another surgery 2 days ago now. He doesn't know what time of life it is. He still remembers me and he remembers people, but he hasn't been out of bed since then. Wow. He's on a feeding tube. I don't really think it's living. I'm grateful to have what we have of him, but I look forward to the time when Jesus calls him home and he can be fully restored. You know what I mean?
Rest in peace.
So that's my context for a car crash. I knew I wasn't that bad, but when people tell you in the hospital, hey man, you're going to be okay. You're going to be all right. But I can see I'm on a feeding tube. I've got a tracheotomy that had a breathing tube. I didn't know if I really believed everybody because my dad hadn't been out of bed since 2012. So as I started to think about my circumstances, and I just don't know where this is going to end up, I started to think about my life. And Reese, you know, as a lifeinaire, that vision is important to me, having a vision for my life, that I know what trajectory I'm on and what my target destination is. I've got it clearly defined. And I had a vision at the time I was 42, I had a vision for the kind of husband and dad that I wanted to be for the next 42 years and what I wanted life to look like and the trajectory I wanted it to be on. But I didn't feel like I had certainty at all that was even viable anymore. I couldn't get my head around, am I going to be able to be the same dad that I've been? Am I going to be able to be the same husband to Cara that I've been for the first 19 years of our marriage? I owned 3 businesses, and am I going to be able to, and had several employees whose dependency was that these companies survive. They depend on the survival of these businesses to get their paycheck. Am I going to be able to run these companies? And as I started to ask myself these questions, I started to kind of circle a drain mentally, not really outwardly. It was all internal. I wasn't asking these questions outwardly. I was just kind of in this hazy, fuzzy, I'm trying to wake up kind of exterior. But internally, as I started to circle a drain of sadness and maybe kind of tempting towards depression. And that's when God spoke to me, man. Now, I I need to also just say, I'm sure there's going to be people of many faiths who watch this podcast or listen to it if you're listening to this. And so this is not, I'm not assuming that everyone shares my beliefs, my faith. But for context, I feel like I need to say that I am a Christian. I'm a Christ follower. I have been for basically my entire life. I am not someone who I've always had a relationship with God that involves prayer. I pray, but it's always felt mostly like a one-way conversation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I know people who say that they hear from God, and I don't not believe those people because I know them well enough to know that I can trust them, but it's not been my experience.
Right.
It's not been like a radio receiver where it's two-way communication for the most part. I can think of a couple of times in my life in the past where I felt like I've maybe heard from God, but this wasn't a normal occurrence for me. And right there in week 5 of my recovery, as I was coming out of that cloud and circling the toilet bowl of sadness emotionally, God spoke to me, and I knew this is God. This is the freaking creator of the universe speaking to me right now. And I can't, for the sake of other people who I'm sure have the same level of skepticism that I would hearing this, I can't give you evidence. I didn't record anything. It wasn't like I heard it with my ears, but I know what happened to me was crystal clear, and it was a pattern interrupt. It was very different than anything I'd ever experienced. The differences were, first of all, it was like a download that just hit my brain all of a sudden with clarity while I was in this fuzzy state. And the words in my mind were clear and precise. And it was like a light switch got flipped in me, man. It was like I didn't find I was no longer sad. In fact, I felt joy.
Mm-hmm.
I felt happiness in an instant. And that was not like me. It's not like me to just flip a switch and turn a corner emotionally. It's not like me to make that kind of a transition instantaneously like that. But it happened, and I can't think of anything other than a divine touch that would cause it.
Mm-hmm.
And the words I heard were, and I say heard, I don't mean with my ears, the words, the download I got said, yes, you have been in a bad car crash, but this was not an accident.
That's probably pretty tough to believe at that point too.
I've got this. You can trust me. I'm continuing what I heard.
Oh.
I've got this. You can trust me. What I expect of you moving forward is to pay attention and be ready. I didn't even know what that meant. Pay attention and be ready for what? Like pay better attention on the road? I didn't have any clue what that meant. But what I did know is that the creator of the universe spoke to me. The one who in 7 days spoke all things into existence. The being that has infinite glory and could do anything, cared enough about me to speak to me in this moment. And what that communicated to me is that people say I was in a car accident, but it wasn't an accident. It was written into my story. I don't know why, but I don't have to know, because I know that God is good and he's trustworthy and he's got this. I think that I think it's important to point out that what I didn't hear is, hey, full recovery is ahead of you. That sadness spiral I was in, I still didn't know if I was going to be able to walk, if I was going to be able to eat, if I was going to be able to breathe on my own. I didn't know what, but I didn't have to know, because I knew this is being written into my story. And I have such an opportunity. I'm a steward of this thing, this car crash. And I'm excited because I get to pay attention and be ready for something. I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to press pause because I've been talking for a long time, guys. This is not my podcast. It's yours, Reese. there's more to the story that starts again 6 months later. But do you have any thoughts or questions you want to just toss at me before I continue, man? Because you asked about this. You opened this can of worms.
So be ready. It's like you said. It's not a very clear message. Did you? And you said it was like a switch flipped. So did you know like to move forward in some way, or did you like just like have to keep tossing that around for a while until that really connected with what was next?
That's a great question. I didn't have any clarity with what it meant or what that meant I should do. What I did have was an instant change of state.
Hmm.
It was a God-given change of state. It wasn't like I Tony Robbins to myself and stood up and, took I didn't use any of the tactics and techniques and strategies that you use to snap yourself out of something or change your state. God flipped a switch, and I knew I don't really have to know the rest of the story. It will unfold. And I was excited that I had a plan that applied to me personally. I've always, being a lifelong Christian, I've always believed that God has a plan, but I've always thought of it more as this umbrella, like a plan that we're all in, almost like we're all players on this divine chess game. And I'm a piece of that puzzle. That's a mix of metaphors, but this wasn't an umbrella plan. This was a specific plan for me personally that I had in front of me from this point forward. And I would have said theologically, I believe that post a pre-car crash, but now it was so real.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just that instant change of state. I knew the rest of the story would unfold in his time.
Mm-hmm. So what came next? Like you're obviously still in the hospital. Like you said, you're still on this feeding tube. Did you progress any faster, or how long were you in the hospital after that?
I left in the 6th week. So
Wow.
once I woke up and came to, my physical restoration came pretty quickly. I had to leave the hospital in a wheelchair and with a walker, but I was able to kind of hobble around like a little old man. I still had a feeding tube in my stomach for, I think, the following 6 weeks. But that wasn't because I needed it. It was because apparently you can't remove a feeding tube until it's been there long enough to form scar tissue. That's hospital-y stuff. Anyway, I had a hole in my throat still, but I wasn't breathing through an apparatus. So I was kind of a muted version of a healthy JP. But then over the next 6 months, man, I was just full restoration. I recovered impressively well to other people, went through some physical therapy, and I'm in a better state of health now than I've ever been in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Less a spleen, I guess.
That's the trick. Let's get our spleens out. And
also, I'd say one other, people who know me know this, one other side effect that I have is that I forget stuff real good. And so I've had to learn to be much more dependent upon my Google Calendar and reminders and notes to myself. And other people, my wife especially, have had to learn to be much more understanding and forgiving of my absent-mindedness and forgetfulness. But man, if that's it's unfortunate, but if that's the worst I have long-term, then I'm good with that. I can laugh at forgetfulness. I can't laugh at like never getting out of the bed and having a feeding tube the rest of my life.
Yeah, for sure. So you obviously didn't jump right back into work. How was your interactions with dealing with that and the people around you, like the support you received? Like what was all going on there?
I received a lot, incredible support, continue to receive support from, of course, Cara, my wife, and my kids, close family that lives here in town. The people I hadn't, I received instant amount of support, not just from family, but from friends and from the world around me. And not just emotional support, but even financial support, because I totaled our car and we had to replace our car. And I was blown away at one thing that I realized about 6 months after. when I finally checked my Facebook page, my Facebook account, and saw the conversations that people who I had never met or who um, I met a long time ago had about the impact that I had on their life. Now, this is not me trying to pat myself on the back or paint a pretty picture of myself, but the people who were touched by my near-death experience. I forgot to mention this. Cara gave Facebook updates while I was in the hospital for people who, just to kind of keep it consolidated so she wasn't on her text messages all day or on phone calls all day. And she didn't intend for this to happen, but that really spread widely to the people, not just that we knew in our world, but who I had met over the years in various capacities at just chance encounters. And we became friends on Facebook, and I don't remember them. But my almost dying in the car crash struck a chord with them, and Cara's shares on Facebook in such a way that they would share, man, I remember when you said this thing to me at a meeting, and it just asked me this one question, and it really changed me and hadn't on me. And reading those in my Facebook profile 6 months later made me realize that I had no idea, and I think this applies for all of us. You have no idea the impact that you have on the humans around you. Even the chance encounters, even the people you see as accessories to your day who are waiting on you or checking you out at Starbucks for the cup of coffee you just bought, your interaction with them has the potential to change their life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I want a weirdo who suddenly asks everybody at the drive-thru, you know, how can I change your life today? But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the rest of the story. This goes back to what God said to me. I received a lot of support and had a lot of realizations in my recovery, and the incredible support I received from people was an important part of that story. One of the big things that happened right after I got back is I got a call from Chuck. Now, do your listeners have any context for who Chuck is, or do you want to give any context for that?
He was briefly mentioned in the last episode, but
Okay.
some explanation for those who hadn't heard that episode yet, maybe might do some good here.
Okay. Chuck Bellman is he's a fellow life and air coach with me. We don't coach in the same sphere, but we coach alongside each other in different ways. And he also has his own near-death experience. Chuck almost died of throat cancer. And when I say almost died of throat cancer, he's cancer-free today. But about 2 or 3 days after I got back from the hospital, I was still in deep recovery mode. I got a call from Chuck. And he just wanted to check in and see how I was, obviously. And that was the first time that I experienced something that has been a recurring experience since then. And I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't even heard of it. What I experienced with Chuck is this intense, unspoken connection with another person who has almost died. It's hard to put into words. The best way that I can describe it is I think in analogies, and I'm going to think in terms of Harry Potter. Have you ever seen all the Harry Potter movies, Reese?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's in one of the movies, I can't remember which, or a couple of the movies, when he shows up at Hogwarts, there's these carriages that are being carried by seemingly nothing, invisible creatures. I can't remember what they're called, but it just looks like magic, like anything else you see in the Harry Potter world. They're being carried invisibly. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, and Harry almost dies, and then when he goes back to Hogwarts, he suddenly sees these beings carrying the carriages, and he's like, "What in the world? What are these?" And Luna Lovegood, who everybody thinks is crazy, tells him what they are, and he says, "You can see them too, and nobody else can seem to see them." And she says, "Yes, and in order to see them, you have to have touched death. You have to have almost died." And she had almost died in her past. And because they shared that experience of having almost tasted death, They were able to see something that no one else could see. And that
Hmm.
was what I experienced with Chuck. Blew me away. I just connected with the trauma and the tragedy and almost losing everything in his past in a way that I hadn't seen coming. And he said, as he asked me all the questions that you would normally ask someone, how's your recovery been? How are you feeling? What's ahead of you? I told him about my conversation with God in the hospital during week 5. And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, John Paul, I can tell you, as someone who has also almost died, you will look back on this at some point as one of the best things that ever happened to you. And as soon as he said it, I knew it was true.
Hmm.
I didn't yet know how. I didn't yet know why or at what point I would be able to connect the dots. But that statement from Chuck immediately resonated with God's statements to me in week 5 of my recovery. Pay attention and be ready. And I just knew this is, I'll go back to what I said earlier. This, almost having lost my life, is an opportunity I'm being gifted. And I'm in realizing that I have an opportunity I have a rapport with people who share trauma and tragedy, whether it's their own near-death experience or somebody else in their life who almost died in a car crash. I have this ability to have credibility and rapport and say things to them that other people don't necessarily have the ability to say,
Hmm.
just to connect with the pain in their life in a very real way.
It's seems counterintuitive because what you're seeing in that time that you almost experienced with your near death experience, somebody else is saying he's got the same thing, that this is a blessing,
Yes.
and this message from God saying like, be ready, like this is part of your life, like not something you would normally think of, that wow, this is setting me up for something I have no idea what it is yet.
Yes.
Very counterintuitive. So you've got these two messages, one from God, one from Chuck. Did you hear anything else? Did this story keep progressing of these messages?
Yes. Now I don't know if it's done, but so I'm not going to say it concludes. I hesitate to say the rest of the story, but the next stage in the development of the story occurred about 6 months after I got home from the hospital. Um, and it involves two things. The first is a book that I was invited to listen to by my CPA, my CEO, actually, called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and the second is another download from the Almighty. And I don't remember how much they were to each other, but they both were in about the 6-month period. So first, The Obstacle Is the Way. This is a book. It's not a book of faith or anything. It's all based on Stoic philosophy, which is very interesting. This was my introduction to Stoicism, which is phrase and terminology. I'm not going to dive deeply into it, but I highly recommend The Obstacle Is the Way to anyone. I listened to it and I've since read it as well. But condensing it down to kind of what is the moral of the story, it's that every obstacle is only a defeat. It's only a mistake. It's only a failure if you see it as that.
Hmm.
It's also pregnant with opportunity for you to learn and grow and become a better version of yourself and to help other people. It's not a matter of just seeing a bright side of things or making lemons out of lemonade. It's a much deeper, truer reality than that. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that and suggest everyone listen to the way tell why that was for me that I just didn't see. It was always written into my story. I just didn't know it. And now I'm a steward. God spoke to me again. I hadn't really gotten the download since I was in the hospital. But 3 things happened over a 2-day period. I'll try and be concise with them. I was at ChickfilA one day eating lunch. I'm a ChickfilA fan. Love me some ChickfilA. Man, fries and ChickfilA sauce. There's something to it. Anyway, I was sitting there just eating and just watching people in the lunch rush, and I noticed this ChickfilA employee who was just doing her best to clean up dirty tables and take trash out. And I noticed there's something different about her, and I couldn't really tell which problem it was, but there was some kind of disability that she has, whether it's maybe some kind of autism or Down syndrome or something, but she was carrying herself just in a way. Her body language said there's some disability going on. And my first thought was, good for Chick-fil-A, because I've always been a fan of Chick-fil-A, man. But I like the values underlying their business. But they're giving her, she's a young adult, giving her an opportunity to have a job, and it's got to be really hard for her to to have this. She knows she's different, I'm sure, and to feel like she can be a normal part of society, and they give her a job. So I kind of high-five Chick-fil-A in my mind. And then I realized something else about her, that she was not making eye contact with people. In fact, she was cleaning the trash up, but she was intentionally averting her eyes, like in a very obvious way, which made me also just think she must feel.
There you are.
Hey.
Sorry, I was just texting you.
When you disappeared, I thought, okay, we got disconnected. I'll let him tell me where to pick up.
All right. So make sure we're still recording. All right. Yeah, we are. All right. So we were talking about this girl at Chick-fil-A, and she's averting her eyes. And that's about where my internet decided it didn't want to work. So.
Okay. All right. So I thought, I'm just going to make her smile. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't know what that looked like, but I'm good at making people smile, whether it's at me or because of me. So I just thought she must feel sad, because I'm sure she knows that she's different, and maybe feels a little embarrassed about how she is at work. So I just had that thought, I just want to make her smile. So I went and picked up my trash after eating and added it to the mound of garbage she was about to take out. And then I just stood there and smiled at her. And I thought, if you look at people long enough, they'll look at you. So like a creeper, I guess I just stood there and smiled. And sure enough, she eventually looked up at me. And I said, and I didn't have this scripted in my mind, but as soon as she looked at me, I said, I just want to say thank you. I know you probably don't hear this much, and you're just doing your job, cleaning up trash, taking it out, and picking up is part of the job. But if you weren't here doing it, there wouldn't be anybody else here doing it. And we're all sitting here eating lunch, trying to enjoy our lunch, and we'd enjoy it a lot less with all this trash here. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And and she smiled and said, thank you. Has anyone ever said thank you to you for saying thank you? You don't really know how to respond to that. I get it, but I didn't really, when she said thank you to my having thanked her, I didn't want to say you're welcome.
Yeah, right.
So I just kind of smiled and just turned and walked off, and thought that was fun.
Yeah.
So I walked away, I realized I don't really know what impact that had. I don't know if she was maybe just feeling kind of her normal sadness that she feels, or embarrassment, or maybe she wouldn't feel anything, and that was just part of whatever condition she had. Or maybe she was feeling like really majorly depressed and was about to go commit suicide in the bathroom in 30 minutes. I don't really know what difference my giving her that little fun moment made in her story.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have to know. I just knew I made a difference, and it was positive, and it was fun, and it felt right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was carrying that I carried it kind of as a high to the dentist's office, and I the lady who's the receptionist was checking people in, and I could tell she was in machine mode, and she was just like, "Hey, who are you here to see? Okay, thanks. Have a seat. Hey, who are you here to see? Okay, thanks. Have a seat." And I thought, I'm going to make her smile.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Hey, who are you here to see?" And I said, "How are you?" She said, I'm fine. Who are you here to see?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to see Doctor, I can't remember his name, but I'm really asking, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know." And I don't know, she took a deep breath and probably had her finger on the button under the desk or something, the emergency button. She said, "Well, this morning started off rough, honestly, because of this and this. And then this afternoon, it got a little better. How are you?" And I said, "Well," and I gave her kind of a similar, authentic, but concise answer. And then I sat down, and I had the thought, that felt right too. It just felt good to kind of acknowledge her humanity rather than just seeing her as an accessory to me checking in at the dentist's office. And then a third occurrence was I had a call scheduled with my bookkeeper for the house guys, the wholesaling company. We hadn't really talked in the whole 6 months. We hadn't caught up on businessy things. And so we scheduled an hour on my calendar for this. We do it via Skype. And so I sat down, and I had the full hour blocked out, but we got it knocked out in 30 minutes. And I was like, heck, that's fun, because I could have 30 minutes free, or I can start something else sooner. And then I just had the thought, I haven't really asked Matt about life or caught up with him since the car crash.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll just take this extra time and ask him what's going on. So I said, "Hey, Matt, I hadn't talked to you in a long time, since before the car crash, other than bookkeeping stuff. How's it been going?" And he said, "Well, I don't know if anybody's told you, but I got a divorce." When you go, "Oh, snap, what did I just step into, and what do I do with it?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you suddenly realize, "Oh, this took a turn I wasn't expecting." I rifled through my choices. Well, I can say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," or I can go, "Oh man, look at the time, I gotta go,"
Right.
or I can just ask him about it
Lean
and
into it.
see. I don't need to press into it, but what if I just sit with him and just see if he is interested in talking about it? And that felt right. So I just said, "Man, what has that been like for you?" I just asked open-ended questions, and he could at any point say, "I don't really." I left it very easy for him to make it close off the conversation if he wanted to. But he responded to my curious questions and said, "Man, the hardest part about this has been getting our two young kids used to the idea that their parents don't live together anymore." And I didn't even know he had two kids. And I didn't know if he had any kind of faith or not, but I had an opportunity to say, "Do you see God in this story in any way?" And I just had an opportunity to ask him things that matter, and to sit with him for a moment and be present with him.
Mm-hmm.
When I finished that conversation, I didn't know how important that conversation was, but I knew we had scheduled this appointment to accomplish in that hour everything that we accomplished in the first 30 minutes, but it was the second 30 minutes that really mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why I needed to have that conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was grateful that I had an opportunity to be really present with him and just acknowledge the pain and connect with the humanity of this person who I didn't even know much about his life up until that point. So that was when God spoke to me again, Reese. He reminded me of those three things: the Chick-fil-A, the interaction with Matt, and the interaction with the person, the receptionist. And he reminded me of what he said to me 6 months prior when I was in the hospital. "What I expect of you moving forward is to pay attention and be ready for opportunities to do things like this, to step into people's lives and to build into them in some way, to make whatever difference I have intended for you to make in their life, big or small." So my assignment, the reason that I didn't die in that car crash, God's purpose for my life is to pay attention and be ready to build people. I don't have to try and create those situations or those circumstances or those interactions, right? It's not like I have a mission from God to ask every single person who I encounter some deep and profound question.
Mm-hmm.
I can just notice things and step into them rather than away from them.
Mm-hmm.
And let God write the rest of the story. I don't have to know the outcome of any of those things. All I have to know is that this is why I'm here, to make some positive impact on this person's life. And every single intersection I have with another human being, it may seem like an accident, it may seem like random chance, but it's a sacred intersection. It's an opportunity for me to in some way touch their lives in a positive way. Whether it's just giving them a smile, making eye contact and seeing them and noticing them. I learned in my car crash recovery when people reached out to me and told me, you made a huge difference in my life when you said this one random thing to me in 2003. And I'm like, I don't even remember who you are.
Right.
Those are the sacred intersections. Those are the times when you cross paths with someone and you just organically make an impact on their life without even trying. We all have those in our life. We all carry with us an opportunity with every single human being that we cross paths with to have an impact on them. And it's our decision. It's our choice. Is it going to be something that builds? Is it going to be a life-giving interaction in some big or small way? Or are they just going to be an accessory or even an obstacle?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the obstacle is the way.
It reminds me of this story I heard of a guy. He was down on the beach just like throwing starfish back in the ocean, and another guy comes up and says, "What are you doing?" The guy tells him, I'm trying to save the starfish. And they're all over the beach here. I'm trying to save them." He's like, "There's got to be millions of starfish on this beach." And the guy picks up another starfish and throws it back in and says, "I made a difference for that one." So,
Huge.
Same, or not the same, obviously, but similar.
Yes, I mean it's very much, it's congruent with the same value system, and it gets me, man. And in all honesty, right now, that is why I said not just yes, but an enthusiastic yes to this conversation, because I know there are some unknown number of people who in the present and in the future who will have an opportunity to hear this story, to endure my really long storytelling. And I admire you for your endurance thus far, whoever you are on the other side of this. But this is, in my mind, every bit as much a sacred intersection as those three encounters that I just shared the story of. It was not an accident. I don't see anything as an accident anymore. And I believe that there is some part of this that is meant to impact you in some way. And you may not even know it now. And I'm not like so full of myself that I'm here thinking I'm going to change everybody's life in this major dramatic way. It might just be that I gave you a little smile, or maybe you look at me and you're like, man, that guy has convinced me that I do not want to do my hair like him. And I definitely don't want tattoos. So I was on the fence, but now I know, based on the way that guy looks, I'm not going to get tattoos. And you don't get tattoos, and so you don't go to the tattoo parlor. And because you didn't go to the tattoo parlor, you weren't there when you walked out of the tattoo parlor and got murdered by somebody who was waiting on the next guy walking out of the tattoo parlor. Mm-hmm. I don't have to know, and you don't have to know, but there's some reason that we intersected right now over the internet, over the podcast verse. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for it.
Mm-hmm. So you've got these two powerful messages, and it's given you a sense of clarity that you didn't ask for. This was messages given to you. What did that mean for you going forward? How has that really transformed what you're doing, what your mission is?
That's a great question. I feel like it has absolutely given me such clarity and certainty and purpose. It's also given me a mission to not just step into those sacred intersections and make whatever impact there is for me to make, but to invite others to understand that we all share this mission. You have the same mission, Reese. I just described a big part of the reason you exist. That's a big part of the reason that you were compelled, whether you realize it or not, to start podcasting, because you want to influence people. You want to impact people. And you don't want that positive to be negative. You don't want it to be yucky. You don't want to tear people down, right?
Right.
You're not doing this for that reason.
Right.
It's part of what is driving you, and recognizing that God is giving you that drive,
Mm-hmm.
I think is an important thing. It's not just something that, like this shared value that we all have because we're humans. I think that it's a real part of the reason we exist.
Right.
Be a life-giving part of
And
other people's stories.
Not resisting it. It's, how is this meaningful in my life? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to go forth and do? And that I think is the message of it. It's not just, oh, I heard this and I don't want to do it, so I'm gonna let it go. No, it's like knocking at my door. I got to open up and see what's on the other side.
What's cool is I don't have to plan this out. I don't have to make a plan and then execute it. I just have to pay attention and be ready, because it's already written into my story. I have to notice these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And then the decision is mine to take that one next step. Do I move forwards or not?
Mm-hmm.
Do I step into this or not? And all I need stepping into it is a curiosity. I don't have to have a certainty that this is a person whose life I'm meant to have this impact on. I just have to step into it with curiosity, and then I'm checking the box. I'm living my dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple. I don't have to plan this out.
So going back to Chuck's question, do you now see your crash as a blessing in your life?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I've got a tattoo here. Well, you see my tattoos, but this tattoo, you probably can't see it because it's upside down and it's far away, but this is meant to look like a coin, and it's to represent money, because it is inspired by a biblical parable, the story of the servants and the talents. For anyone who isn't familiar with it, I invite you to just Google servants, talents, parable, and you can read it in a couple minutes. It's not a true story. It's a parable, which is an example story. And I won't retell the story because I'll do a bad job of it. But in the end, these three people who were given opportunities to be a good steward of their master's resources, their boss's resources. Two of them failed miserably, and one of them, who was given the least to be a good steward of, succeeded the most. And at the end, his master, his boss, for lack of a better explanation, said, "Well done, good and faithful. You have been faithful with little. Enter into the joy of your master." And those are the words right around the circle there, is enter the joy of your master. And right there in the middle, it says, pay attention, be ready, build people. These are epic, life-altering realizations. And that's why, and they would never have come to me had it not been for my near-death experience. So it gives me an opportunity to connect with the trauma and tragedy in other people's lives. It gives me all of the incredible values and purpose and mission and vision that I've just shared with you. If I hadn't almost died in that car crash, I wouldn't have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
That's powerful. That is powerful. So what would you say to anybody else who is circling the drain, or maybe they've heard a couple messages themselves, or just anybody who's been somewhere or somebody who is now currently where you've been? What would you say to them?
I would invite that person, even if you don't believe that there is a God, I would invite you to just try asking him about how he feels about you. Just mentally, you can just think thoughts. That's praying. You can just say, God, what do you think about me? What do you think about this situation I'm in and my purpose? And why did it happen to me? Just start asking curious questions. And then I would invite you to pay attention to just that still small voice that you hear in a response. If you do, I'm not saying I know you will, but it took a long time for me to begin to pay attention to those thoughts and see them as the voice of God rather than just random thoughts I had. I would invite you to try and just play around with that. And I would also invite you to, even if you don't feel it's true right now, make a choice to embrace what is true. And that is that you have a reason, you have a purpose. There's a reason you're here. And you don't have to have it understood or figured out in order for you to continue to be here. It's an exciting adventure, this novel that you're in. You don't have to read the end first. You can just move forward and believe that there's a reason for you to be here, and pay attention and be ready for opportunities to touch other people's lives in the sacred intersections ahead of you. So those would be the words I would share with that person, Reese.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's going to touch somebody somewhere, whoever's listening, watching.
Thanks for asking.
So what is it that you're doing next? What are you working on? Where are you headed?
Well, I'm still coaching. I'm really not doing anything next. I'm just doing more of the same. I'm still coaching with Life in Air. I'm not flipping houses anymore. I've moved into flipping land. So I live in Tennessee, but I flip rural vacant lots in Oregon. That's a brain twist. And with Awesome REI, I'm still the director of Awesome. We create a lot of training and products and programs for real estate investors. So what I'm really enjoying is that when people ask me, what do I do for a living? It full circle back to where I started. I can't really answer the question with like a job that I can just easily describe, like a hat I wear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using what I'm good at and what I enjoy, and where those two things intersect, to impact people, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through the training we created at Awesome REI, even in buying and selling land. Every single human being that I buy a parcel from or sell a parcel to is a sacred intersection. Mm-hmm. And I'm using the skills as a real estate investor that God has given me, and the insight and the knowledge to touch other human beings across the country. And I don't have to know the impact that I'm having. So that's what I do for a living, is I build people. So I'm doing more of that. And so will I be doing the same thing next year? I don't know, probably, but God may decide to add another thing or take another thing away, but I'll still be doing the same thing, just in a different form. And I'm lucky enough that I get to do it with people I enjoy, and I get to do it all from home.
You're like a real life fisher of men.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
well said.
That's wonderful. So I'm really big on reading books. As I mentioned in our last podcast, I did a calculation where you can read a book a week if you read 37 minutes a day for the average person. So in order to level up, I always trying to figure out what kind of books people have in their life. And I don't know if you're big on reading. Some people aren't. But I'm going to ask you about a few books you may recommend in different categories and see what you come up with. So what would you recommend about mindset?
All right. So let me respond first. I'm not a great reader, but I am a reader. I'm a slow reader, but I love reading. So it takes me as much time to read one book as my wife to read like 3 or 4 books. But I don't care, because I don't really got to be good at reading. I just do it because I like it. You can see this bookshelf behind me. It's full of books.
There you go.
On the mindset thing, and this is going to connect with a lot of what I shared in my story as well. I highly recommend a book. I'm not even sure that it's in print anymore, but it's a super small little book. I thought I had it on my desk over here. It's called Sacred Intersections.
Hmm.
You can find it on Amazon. Just look up Sacred Intersections. I mean, it's a real thin little read, but it really talks about the whole idea of every intersection with another human being, seeing it as the sacred thing that you have an opportunity within. I highly recommend that. I highly recommend The Obstacle is the Way, as previously stated. Number 3 is the book Life in Air.
Hmm.
I know you're also a fan, Lifeonaire. All 3 of those you can find on Amazon. I'm also a big fan of the 4-Hour Work Week. I don't know if you call that mindset. For me, it's more the mindset.
Hmm.
You guys probably know Tim Ferriss, the 4-Hour Work Week. I'm also a big fan of his podcast as well, the Tim Ferriss Show. That's 4 recommendations that I can make unhesitatingly. Is that a word? Unhesitatingly?
It is now.
And I held up 3 when I said that. That's 4 unhesitatingly that I can make. Right now I'm reading Profit First, and it's fantastic, but I
Yeah,
can't yet.
Mike
Can't yet.
Michalowicz. Yeah.
Haven't crossed the finish line on that, but I'm a big Pumpkin Plan fan as well. It's a businessy book though.
Okay. Oh, well, so that's my next category. What would you recommend for business?
So maybe it's kind of a hybrid for 4-Hour Work Week, the Pumpkin Plan, and the One Thing.
Gary Keller.
The One Thing, Gary Keller. Yes, I've got quotes from him all over my wall here, my wall of indoctrination. And so far, I could probably say Profit First will end up being in that category.
Mm-hmm.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad, obviously. I'm not a fan of Robert Kiyosaki's larger, no, I wouldn't recommend his hotel seminars or bigger coaching programs, but the nucleus, his origins, the books are fantastic. They were game changers for a lot of people. That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
All right. What about health?
I can't think of anything health-wise.
Right.
Health is my wife's thing, Cara's thing. She is, I consider myself somewhat healthy, but it's mostly because of her. We are into, therefore we are into holistic natural health,
Mm-hmm.
and naturopaths and that kind of thing. So all the edgier, non-traditional things that most traditional medicine doesn't acknowledge well tends to be our world. And she's read all the books, and I've read none of them.
Well, you got a walk-in library there to ask.
That's right. That's right.
All right. What would you recommend on relationships?
I would recommend 2 books. The first is called Love and Respect. Or no, maybe it's called Love and Respect. I think it's called Love and Respect. You should just Amazon
Amazon will tell you.
Yeah. I just turned Amazon into a verb there, didn't I? Like Google. Amazon it. Love and Respect, it's for married couples, helps you really understand each other's hardwiring better, and what you each, how you think differently. That was a game changer in our marriage over a decade ago. Also, the 5 love languages.
Mm-hmm.
Chapman, I think is his name. You can just look it up, the 5 love languages. Highly recommend it. You can take the love languages test and see what your love language is and what your spouse's are. And they're probably not the same. And understanding how the other person shares and needs to receive love to feel loved is a game changer in a lot of people's worlds as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the top 2 books that come off my brain shelf.
Wonderful. All right. 2 more categories here.
All right.
What would you recommend on personal finance?
I think I would go with Profit First, even though that's aimed a little bit towards businessy entrepreneur types. My wife is also our financial genius and bookkeeper, so she might have more to add to that, Cara. But when I open a spreadsheet, I kind of go cross-eyed. I realized a long time ago, I used to feel guilty that I wasn't good at mathy things and numbers, and I would watch Shark Tank, and these people would start talking business numbers and profit margins, and I would just go, "Oh, I'm confused, and I'm I want to shut down. I used to feel guilty about that. Like, man, am I really designed to be a business owner? Because if I don't like that kind of stuff and I find it hard, what does that say about me? I would
Mm-hmm.
sink under those questions on Shark Tank. And then I realized that's not my genius zone.
Right.
It's not being a good steward of who I am to try and be great at things that I suck at or that I hate.
Mm-hmm.
The more of my personal resources I can pour into the things that are my unique geniuses, my strengths, my God-given hardwiring, the better steward I am of who I am. So I lean into things that I do well, that are fun and interesting, and that people tell me I do well. And for all the other things that are important, I have other people do them who do them well.
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife, who is great at bookkeeping and numbers. So I'm not going to be deep on the financial resources category.
Well, you don't need to if you got the people around you that can. So
That's right.
all right. And the last category here, what book would you recommend about life?
Oh man, see previous recommendations. I would say Life and Air, Sacred Intersections. And I think at the top, very top of that list for me as a Christ follower is the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
In case it's not painfully obvious for anyone else. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Podcasts are growing. They've been on the scene for a while now, but do you have any podcasts you recommend?
Tim Ferriss show I'm a big fan of the Tim Ferriss show. So highly recommend that. I do listen to a lot of stuff, but I don't have a lot of extra time because I don't like drive to and from a job, or in fact, if on a good week, I only leave the house twice, once for church, once for family lunch. So they don't have a lot of that extra time that people use to listen to podcasts. My main consumption is when I'm mowing the lawn weekly, riding lawnmower for 3 hours, and I can stick something in these ear holes. So typically the Tim Ferriss show is my go-to. And also for anyone who is also interested in land investing, the RE Tipster podcast is a great one for land investors, but that's just a small, probably nobody whoever ever watches this will necessarily be interested in land investing.
Yeah.
Those are the two things I listen to mostly in the podcast arena, though.
Cool. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
Not that I haven't mentioned. I mean, the awesomerei.com is the website where I'm the director of Awesome. And if anybody's interested in not just land, but in real estate investing stuff, we have a number of trainings and programs there that might scratch your itch, and just also some free stuff that's fun. And then I like to add a good sense of humor too. Besides that, I would say your show.
There we go. That's a good one.
Yeah. So guys, leave a comment in iTunes, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Really, iTunes pays a lot of attention to the thumbs up and the comments for shows. So if Reese's show makes any kind of impact on you, even if you just think it's kind of okay, then do them a solid and go leave a comment and a thumbs up in iTunes. And iTunes will just give it a little vote and help it to impact more people similarly.
Beautiful. I may have to take that clip out and add it into the rest of my episodes. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
awesomerei.com. Also, jpmoses.com is kind of my own personal website. I do create random blog posts here and there when I feel it, when I get an itch. I don't make money there or anything, but those are the two main places I would say.
Awesome. Lastly, what action should a viewer or listener take right now?
I would say pay attention and be ready. That's
Beautiful.
all I can say.
Beautiful. Man, this has been very powerful. I hope anybody who's listening really listens and intentionally listens and hears what JP's saying here. This is life-altering, life-building content here. Can't thank you enough, JP.
Thanks for the opportunity, man.
Um, well, that's all we have for this show, and talk again soon.
All right. High five, everyone.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a rating on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever platform you're listening on. If you want to see more, go to goldenhandcuffsguy.com, where you have access to my blog, my podcasts, and a bunch of other information to help you remove your golden handcuffs.